So a couple weeks ago, I did a podcast and a YouTube video on some of the big factors you need to consider when picking a specific day to retire in the year. But I really didn't get into specific examples for 2022. And because, of course, it is 2022, at least when I'm recording this, I'm going to go over the exact days that are probably best at optimizing the things that you as a first federal employee should be thinking about. And I'm actually going to be sharing my screen, going through and sharing the calendar and the different things to consider. So if you're on the podcast and you want to see those visuals, definitely check out the YouTube channel. We're going to jump right in. So if you haven't seen that other video, you could certainly check that out. But I'm going to recap some of the main things you want to consider when trying to pick a day to retire. Number one of the big things to consider is annual leave. And as you know, most people, if you don't use up a certain amount of annual leave, you lose some of it at the beginning of every leave year. So what that does is it incentivizes you as a federal employee to retire as close to the end of the leave year as possible, meaning you can accrue as much annual leave as you possibly can, and you get a big fat check for that annual leave at retirement time. So that's one big thing to consider is, hey, the closer you retire to the end of the year, the potentially more annual leave, your payout would be bigger if you choose to save it. That's number one. Second, if you retire close to the end of the month, that means that your pension will start sooner because your pension as a first federal employee will start the first day of the month after you retire. So if you retire right at the end of the month, then your pension would start then the first day of the next month. Now, when I say start, I mean it's payable at that time, but of course it takes OPM some time to process your application, so you don't get payments right away, but it is best to be at least eligible and have them payable as of the next day if possible. So meaning, so far for annual leave, you want to retire as close to the end of the year as possible. Next, for your pension, you want to retire near the end of the month as possible. And lastly, when it comes to accruing annual leave, actually one small little tidbit is if you retire at the end of a pay period, then you actually accrue that annual leave. If you retire at, let's say, in the middle of a pay period, then you don't actually accrue your leave during that pay period you got only a piece of, right? So those are the three things. So basically, the best times would be at the end of the year, at the end of a pay period, at the end of a month, right? And so those three combinations don't show up together all the time. Now, if you look at here on my screen, again, if you're on the podcast, check out the video, you can see that these are the different pay periods for 2022. For example, let me unhighlight everything. For example, the first pay period of the year was January 2nd through January 15th. Now, the pay period year does not line up always with the just calendar year. It's different, right? But there's actually one nuance here. It is unique in 2022, and this happens every so often, but certainly not every year, that the last day of the year, the 31st, is actually the perfect day when it comes to looking at these three factors that we talked about. First, it's the last day of the year, which is awesome. It is the last day of a month, and it is the last day of a pay period. So December 31st in 2022 is really the perfect trifecta of all the different things. Now, what is the big, I guess, elephant in the room that I haven't addressed yet? And that is, when the heck do you want to retire? When the heck what does it make sense for your life? Because obviously maximizing these little things can be helpful, but honestly, you could run the numbers for you, and I have different videos on what your annual payout might be and the different factors that this can come into play. But when are you first eligible to retire? When are you first eligible and can afford to retire? A lot of people retire December 31st, but it doesn't mean that has to be you. Obviously, like I said, there's the three reasons to potentially pick December 31st. And if we look at the other dates in 2022, well, the end of July is probably a good date as well, because the 30th of July is about the end of the month. It is the end of a pay period, right? And so that's something to consider. If annual leave, maybe getting that payout isn't as big of a deal, right? And you just want to look at the other things, right? That's a good matchup there. But here you can see the different pay periods and when they land compared to the end of the month. So definitely check that out. to find a time that works for you. But maybe, let's say, maybe you live in a cold place and you don't want to retire during the winter, right? Maybe you want to retire in the summer so you could go on that trip you always wanted, right? That's the big elephant in the room that I have to always mention is you can try to optimize your benefits all day long, but honestly, the best way to quote unquote optimize your benefits is just to keep working forever, right? Because the longer you work, the higher your pension's gonna be, the more you're gonna have in your TSP, the more everything you're gonna have, right? So we know retirement's not just about maximizing your benefits. We know retirement and money in general is meant so that you can live the life that you want. So there's this balancing act that you have to figure out that what works for you. Obviously, if you can, if it's convenient to retire December 31st, hey, maybe it makes sense to do so. But if not, what makes sense for you? You just have to know the things that come into play and the factors that you have to consider. And once you know those, make an educated decision for you on when you want to retire and what makes sense for you. So I hope that was helpful. If there's any topics though that you would like us to cover here on the YouTube channel, on the podcast, put in the comments below on the YouTube channel. That's a great place where I kind of look for content. It's like, okay, what do you guys want to hear about? And then of course, future videos and podcast episodes are based on those. So I hope that was helpful. Have an incredible rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time.